Hi, good morning, and today is 8 a.m. In the UK, 8 a.m. London time in the UK, and this is the ZP
Hi, good
webinar.
morning.
Just checking that the volume was coming through okay. So, yeah, every week at 8 a.m. London time, we do a webinar just for our Developer Zone members. So, thank you for being here today. So what I will do is go straight into the slides. So every week we do this webinar just for our members. As I say, today is the 18th of March 2021, and in these webinars we like to cover what we, as a member of the ZP Developer Zone, you are able to attend these webinars. We also have, the Developer Zone membership. We also have the ZP Academy, and we also have collaborations. And also, we do list jobs. So I just want to kind of give you an update on some of the job situations that we have listed up on the forum. And it's also worth saying that the way the ZP Developer Zone works is that as a member of the ZP Developer Zone, you can ask questions, and you will find that then we sort of have, we actually bring those questions into the webinar, and we try and answer some of your questions. And as I say, we use the webinar to actually answer some of the questions that appear on the ZP Developer Zone. So I just want to say that what we've done this week is we have a new job listing on the forum, and it's actually for a ZP sponsored PhD at Plymouth University. So at Zero Peacock, we have lots of collaborations around the world. We have a strong one at Plymouth University, and so there's a PhD opportunity there, and you'll find that opportunity. We've created a job listings forum where anyone who's a member of the ZP Developer Zone can actually list the jobs that they're interested in, or sorry, the jobs that they have available, and they can also view jobs that are posted by other people. So ZP has posted a job that I think application starts in something like the 1st of April. And then the actual PhD starts in about the 1st of October 2021. So it's probably worth having a look at that or sharing that with colleagues and friends. Now we also, this live streaming that we do it specifically for the ZP developer members, and on there we also have a forum, and we do look at the forum. So if we look at the forum at the moment, we ask the question in the research forum, what would you like us to kind of cover in the ZP Developer Zone webinar? And you guys, Kashmir asked about SPEs, screen printed electrodes for FET-based applications. So that was one of the questions or topics that came up on the forum. Another question that came up on the forum was a question from Shirley regarding the different electrodes, or the shapes of different electrodes and their significance. So we will touch upon that today. So that was also part of the forum, and Hasim was also interested in microfluidics for sensor development, and we'll also cover that today. So what I really like about the ZP Developer Zone and the webinars that we have is there's like a sort of feedback loop that, if you're posting on the forum or we're discussing it on the forum and it needs a little bit of a deeper explanation, then it's quite nice that we can actually then bring those discussions into the webinar. And so if you have any more questions or thoughts, post them on the forum, and we can sort of bring them into the webinar as well. So as I say, there were 3 things that kind of have recently been posted. Screen printed electrodes for FET-based applications, and FET is field effects transistors, and we can discuss that today. Shirley was interested in why all these different electrode shapes. and Hasim was starting to be interested in microfluidics for biosensor development. So the first question came from Kashmir, and it was regarding there was a paper that was discussing the use of screen printed electrodes and field effect transistors. And so I've sort of these are some of the images that were put onto the forum, and I'm going to discuss that now. First of all, I just want to discuss biofets. So at Zimmer and Peacock, we do a lot of electrochemical biosensors, and we don't touch too much on field effect transistors. But FETs are, I think, very similar actually to the electrochemical biosensors that we deal with, and you can work with FETs or you can work with electrochemical biosensors. It's exactly very similar technology. It's really is similar. It's just a preference. And whether you work with electrochemistry or you work with field effect transistors, actually depends, I think, on your background. If you're a chemist and you've come into electrochemistry, then you tend to do electrochemical biosensors. If you're from an electronics background and you're an electronics engineer, an analog engineer, you tend to do field effect transistors because that's what you're familiar with, or you tend to do field effect transistors. So when you look at a field effect transistor, it has kind of three elements to it. It has what they call a source, a drain, and a gate. So a source, a drain, and a gate. It's not so dissimilar, really, to an electrochemical sensor, where we have a working electrode, a counter electrode, and a reference electrode. Now, FETs, like electrochemical sensors, come in lots of different shapes. Here they have the gate. They call it, if I didn't call it a gate, I could call it an electrode in some ways, but they have their gate to the side, so they call it a side gate. In this configuration, they have the gate on the back, so that they often call that a backside gate. In the paper that I'm sort of looking at today, they have the gate attached to an electrode up here, and that's sort of front side gate. And so when I look at the paper that we're interested in, it has a drain, a source, and a gate. So it is a form of biofet. But the thing that makes biofet slightly complicated is that you always have a drain and a source, but where the gate is can sort of move around a bit. Sometimes it's to the side, sometimes it's on top, sometimes it's underneath, so that it does move around a bit. Hi, Annie. I'm just going to say hi to one of to Annie's online. Right. I also want to just say, when we're talking about FETs, people tend to functionalize them in generally two places. They either functionalize them on the gate, so that's why I've drawn the arrow here, so they functionalize the gate. And then in another one, this is a sort of GFET device, you can see here that they actually have the gate, as they call it, on the back side. So they have the source, the drive, and the gate on the back side. And there they functionalize between the source and the drain. So FETs, in my opinion, are very similar in so many ways to biosensors. That there's, electrochemical biosensors, I should say, that there's a source, a drain, and a gate. In biosensors, we often have a working electrode, a reference electrode, and a counter electrode. In FETs, they have they tend to move the gate around. So just on this page, some of the gates are on the side, and some of the gates are on the back side. And if I was to summarize a FET, it will often have a source, and let me just move that. It'll often have a source. It'll often have a drain. People might functionalize between the source and the drain, or they actually might functionalize on the gate. So that tends to sort of move around depending on which particular paper you're reading. I don't really think it actually makes, as a functional device, it makes little difference. From a pattern perspective, or because you're writing a paper, you might tend to say that one's better than the other, but I'm not sure it's really that important to the functionality. So we've been asked to sort of discuss screen printed electrodes for use with FETs, and that's what I am going to do. So if I dig into the paper, it has a source, a drain, and it has a gate. Now, I've said that actually these things are quite similar to electrochemical sensors as well. Here's a hypervalue screen printed electrode from Zimmer and Peacock, and when you analyze it, we often have a counter electrode, a working electrode, and a reference electrode. So, FETs seem different, they're called different. There are differences, but I don't think it's as fundamental as people really think it is. If you were going in a FET direction for your application, or you're going in a electrochemical sensor direction, you can get to the finish line using both technologies. Which one you end up using, as I say, depends on, do you have a background from the electronics world, or do you have a background actually from like a chemistry world? So I tend to, clearly I'm a chemist, so I tend towards electrochemical sensors, and if you're an electronics person, then you tend towards FETs. And that's really, I think, where the division between which technology you tend to use comes from. Now, we've been asked to discuss screen printed electrodes for FETs, and this was the image that was posted on our forum. And now I'm going to sort of dive in on the detail of this a little bit more. So when I dive in on this, what we have here is essentially a gold working electrode, and I'll go in on the bigger picture here. We have a gold working electrode in a circular pattern, so we're quite familiar with that, with a reference electrode running around the edge of it, a silver chloride reference electrode. And so if we look at a gold 303 from Zimmer and Peacock, what we have here is a gold working electrode with a silver chloride reference electrode running around the edge and side of it. So actually, these two electrodes are just really similar. And it really comes to a point that Shirley made on the forum, which is, how important is electrode shape? I don't really think it's actually as important as people would like to make out. We can discuss in a bit why electrodes have different shapes, but whether it's terribly important, actually, I really think it's much less important than people think. And it's quite confusing because there's so many different electrode geometries. But what I want to say here is, if you're reading papers and they're using screen printed electrodes, for example, and you are reading this particular paper, when you actually zoom in on the image, literally what they have here is a gold working electrode surrounded by the reference electrode. And even though there's two pads here, they're actually shorted together. So the contact with the reference electrode comes through this pad, around this silver chloride, and to this other pad here. So they're actually, it's just one electrode which is made in contact with two places. So a central electrode and then the reference electrode running around the edge. And that's really similar to this geometry where we have a central electrode, which is also gold, with a reference running around the side of it. So it's kind of interesting because when you examine these papers, these very clever academics, built all this from scratch. But actually, you can also commercially obtain these kind of things as well. And just to make the point, if you do zoom in on this, there's the central electrode and there's the reference electrode running around the edge of it there. So I'm going to dig into this paper a little bit deeper. What they've done in this paper is they're using, I would say, almost a traditional electrochemical sensor in conjunction with a FET. So this is a FET. It's a field effect transistor. And what they've done is they've connected this gold electrode to the gate input on a FET. So essentially, they're using this electrode up here as a switch. And so what's happening on this surface is then influencing through this conducting pad the gate here. So what they've done is they've taken an electrode system and they've connected it to the gate of a MOSFET. A MOSFET, by the way, is just mixed oxide field effect transistor. So I know we're really getting into we're coming away a little bit today from our traditional talking about working electrodes, reference electrodes, and counter electrodes. But I think it's kind of interesting because if you are into biosensors, you will come across field effect transistors quite a bit, and they seem very different and sometimes very alien depending on your background. But essentially, they will, if somebody's writing a paper about FET, you could take their formulation and put it onto a electrochemical sensor. And likewise, if somebody's written a paper on electrochemical sensors and you want to do them on a biofet or a FET, you could take their formulation and put it on the probably on the gate of a FET. So the two sciences, though they have different words and slightly different language, they're translatable. You can take something from one and place it in the other, one from one and place it in the other. So in this instance, what I would suggest to people if they were trying to kind of copy this paper is actually take one of these kind of screen printed electrodes that we have, and essentially you can just attach the working electrode to the gate pin on this FET, this field effect transistor, and you've done it. And the field effect transistor, you know, this is the part number that they used in the paper. You can look it up online. And so what I was thinking about a little bit is, if Zimmer and Peacock was doing this, we would take one of our standard connectors, something like the ZP500212. I know it's a bit of a mouthful, but we would take one of those and literally put the FET on top of the board, and that's then equivalent to this diagram here, because essentially what they're doing here is they have the effectively screen printed electrode. It connects into a connector, and the connector connects to the FET. So what I'm doing here is saying this is the connector into which we can plug one of our screen printed electrodes, and then as long as we do the traces to the FET, there's a PCB on here, and we can just place the FET on top of the PCB. So it's quite straightforward to basically reproduce that paper. I'm going to bring a slide in now that I gave last week, and I just want to kind of emphasize this, that if you're working with either FETs or you're working with biosensors, when you're functionalizing, I think it's more efficient with materials to basically, if you want to functionalize them with an enzyme or an antibody, don't flood them like I've shown here. So don't do this kind of just put on a large drop and cover everything. Try and be a bit more precise, and actually, if you're doing drop coating, use a sort of micro pipette and just drop the solutions like that, so that they then merge into sort of one drop like that. And obviously we do it on robots so that we can be particularly precise, but probably in your labs you'd have to do it by hand pipetting. I'm just going to go to Shirley's question slightly, which is, you know, why all these different shapes? Now, these are all different electrodes that we have on the Zimmer and Peacock website. And the reason we have these different shapes is because people ask for them. That's one of the primary reasons. And I used to think that, you know, that they would actually give advantages in different applications. My honest opinion these days is that all these different shapes in screen printed electrodes, and probably FETs as well, it's just leading to complexity and confusion. I actually think it's completely unnecessary to have all these different shapes. I mean, look at this. You know, we have a spiral, we have parallel electrodes. Here we have interdigitated electrodes, where the electrodes are like fingers going into each other. We have rectangular electrodes, square electrodes, circular electrodes, larger circular electrodes, microelectrodes, parallel electrodes. So we do have an awful lot. Now, shape and distance is more important in big electrodes. When I mean big electrodes, people who are doing electrolysis or doing large-scale fuel cell applications, the bigger the electrode and higher the currents, the more significant your electrode shapes are and the distances between your electrodes are. It's because you're dealing now with higher resistance applications. But in biosensors, we are very small, and our currents, for example, are very small. So that means that the problems with resistances between electrodes is actually very diminished. And so the difference the effect that shapes have on biosensing. So Kashmir is asking how do I drop coat a rectangular working electrode, and the way we do it is, I'm just going to back up slightly and then come back to this. So I just want to answer the question. What we do is we have the gold electrode like that. We come in with a micro pipette and we add in sort of 1 microliter, 1 microliter, and 1 microliter, and then just drag the pipette tip slightly between the two drops just to make them coalesce. So we literally do it by eye, 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops, and then just maybe if the 3 drops don't come together, then we just use the tip of the pipette just to kind of make them touch, and then they sort of coalesce. Now this is rectangular, which really comes back to Shirley's point, which is why at ZP do you often use rectangular electrodes, when everyone else is using circular? And that's a big thing. See that, why are so many electrodes that you see in the literature circular? Because you can drop coat on them quite nicely. You drop on them, the drop spreads out, and you get a sort of even distribution. Now, the thing is, ZP is very different because so many companies are actually, who make screen printed electrodes, are focused on the R&D stage of development, whereas Zimmer Peacock is actually interested in the product stage of development. So we know that there's very little advantage in a circular electrode once you get beyond the R&D phase. So if you truly want to go to market, you won't be going to market with a circular electrode. So Shirley's question is, why do you have these different shapes? And I'm actually saying we have a lot of shapes of electrodes, but actually they make very little difference to the performance of the electrode. When we first started, we made circular electrodes because it was traditional. That people would want circular electrodes because you could just drop cast on them and the drop would just spread out and you get a really nice kind of coating. But I want to go to my next slide, and not the next slide, but the slide afterwards. I'm going to show you why many of our electrodes are rectangular. So the next slide, and thank you, Shirley, for starting this debate. So I'm saying to you that electrogeometry makes very little difference to sensor performance. So let me show you an electrogeometry. It's an interdigitated electrode. Now at Zimmer Peacock, when we first started making interdigitated electrodes, we actually made them in a spiral, because essentially what we did is we took 2 lines that had equal distance from one another and turned them around on themselves and formed a spiral. And we thought that that's going to make for a really good conductivity sensor, and it did. So we thought we didn't want to make an interdigitated one, but we wanted the advantages of it because we were always told that interdigitated was really good for doing conductivity measurements. And so we made a spiral electrode. But the funny thing is, now I'm just going to go, you can find this on our website, and maybe I'll have to put some links later on to this. We have done conductivity measurements with rectangular electrodes, spiral electrodes, and also a conductivity sensor from Toledo, from Mettler Toledo. So we've done it in so many different ways, different materials, different electrogeometries, and with the Toledo probe, very different electrogeometries, because in that probe they have 2 platinum electrodes that face each other, facing each other like this, whereas our electrodes, the 2 electrodes are in the same plane, so it is very different. The shocking thing is the data is really similar. It didn't matter whether you had your electrodes like this, electrodes were like this in the plane, whether your electrode was rectangular or spiral, all gave the same results. So that is an example when I want to say that electrode shape doesn't actually matter too much. Now in that application, now you could argue, well, my application is really special and it does need the electrode shape. I'd honestly say it's not that special. We use all sorts of shapes, and it very rarely affects the application itself. Now, why are we making many of our electrodes rectangular? Could be your question. It's a legitimate question. So this is why we make many of our electrodes rectangular, because we're not so focused on the on the R&D phase, we're actually we generally want all of our customers to get to a product phase. And so if you look at the ZP website, you will actually find these kind of capillary videos up there. There's one here where we're filling it with solutions, and you can see the solutions wicking in. I'm going to go a bit faster now because it's 8:25 and we need to hold these so I'll go a little bit faster now. But now the reason that we make them rectangular is because we really want everyone to go to market. And if you look at a glucose sensor, it doesn't have circular electrodes, it has rectangular electrodes. Because what this allows you to do is this. You can imagine that you have a rectangular electrode like this, and when the blood comes in or the solution comes in, it covers the first electrode, so signal versus time. The blood comes in a bit more in the capillary, contacts the next electrode, and then when it covers the third electrode, it completes the electrochemical cell, and the signal suddenly jumps up. And I'll just pull that out like that. So what that says to you is, we lay out our electrodes in such a way that we're imagining your final product. We're not imagining your R&D phase. We're generally imagining your final product. And so we imagine in your final product, you'll probably have to have solution coming in. And how's your sensor going to know when it's covered in solution or it's adequately filled? And it will know it because we will have, if you're working with ZP, we'll have laid your electrodes out in such a way that as the solution comes in, it covers the first electrode, second electrode. By the time it covers the third electrode, the signal jumps up, and we can then use that as a fill signal to say the electrode is filled. And if you do it with circular, yeah, maybe you can make it work the same way, but we literally have, a parallel electrode, a parallel electrode, a parallel electrode that all get covered sequentially, and then that's the signal. And that's why we do our electrodes the way we do. They do this a lot in the glucose strip manufacturing world. For the same reason, they want to know when the sample is in the chamber and that there's sufficient sample. And this actually, I'm going to go quick now. This is linked really to the microfluidics thing, that we're thinking ahead. We're thinking about the microfluidics that's going to be part of this biosensor. So let me come to microfluidics. This is something that I'm going to go very quickly on this now, but 5 years ago, we 3D printed this piece and we stuck it on top of a screen printed electrode, and this is a little chamber here. So at Zimmer Peacock, we're very interested in making also the microfluidics for biosensors. And so to Hasim's point, let's start talking about microfluidics. So at Zimmer Peacock, what we're doing at the moment is we're designing 3D printable microfluidic chambers that can then be attached to our hypervalue and our electrodes. So the plan is we're designing these, and the nice thing is we've printed them, and in a few weeks we'll do a webinar on these, and if you're a ZP Developer Zone member, you'll be able to get a hold of these files and print them in your lab, and so you'll be able to actually source screen printed electrodes from people like Zimmer Peacock and 3D print some microfluidics and put them on top, and now you have really a complete biosensor device. So we have been prototyping, and you can see we're getting pretty close now to be able to launch this, and this is only going to be available through the ZP Developer Zone, so just a heads up. Summary, I'm going to go quickly now, but I do appreciate you all coming along this week, so let me just summarize. ZP Developer Zone is getting really active. We've got new members, new questions. I appreciate the questions coming in. You see we're very active. The forums are useful. If you've got questions, post them on the forum, because we are looking at them and we are replying, and we are saying, we will hold webinars around it. This video will be online, so you can go back and review what we've talked about today, and really cement it in your minds. But we have talked about FETs. We've talked about electrode layout. We've talked about a little bit about microfluidics. So that's it for today. It's 8:30, 8:30 and 18 seconds. I'm sure you guys have got some meetings to attend. I know I have. So Thank you for coming to the ZP Developer Zone. It's the 18th of March. We start these every week at 8 a.m. And if you're not a member, please join. And we look forward to doing this next week. So I appreciate the questions today, guys. And I will speak to you next week and see you on the forum. All right. Thanks, Hasim. Thanks, Kashma. Take care, guys. Thank you very much, Kashma. I like the comment. Thank you very much.